All right, so we're on to week 3 of our Science for Healthcare Workers, and the topic for today is cell growth and division stages of development. And we're really going to be looking at human development. And for me, this was actually the lesson I was most excited to teach about because I feel it's also the topic that I know the most about. So to have some warm-up questions to kind of get our brains thinking about this topic of human development, I have 3 questions for us to talk about. First question, what are the different stages of human development? How do we develop and what are those stages? What do we measure when we look at human development? What are we actually looking at when we talk about human development? And then 3, what are warning signs of delayed human development or developmental disorders? For example, we know we have individuals with autism, the autism spectrum disorder, individuals with the genetic disease of Down syndrome. How do we know that? And how do we identify it? What warning signs do we see in their development? All right, so getting into this topic, these were hard questions because when we talk about human development, there are so many different things and aspects that we can talk about. We could go from the cellular level of how we start from just one cell and develop into this multicellular organism. We can talk about all these different stages that we see in life, all these different things that are developing, and we're going to take a look at these 4 categories with a little more depth. All right, so first, starting at the cellular level, we have 2 terms about how cells divide and make more cells. We have mitosis and we have meiosis. We're going to explain both of these here. Mitosis, the simplest explanation that I have, mitosis is when you have one cell and it makes a complete copy of itself, almost like a clone. And that's how we grow, right? Our cells divide and make a copy of itself for another cell. And that's why we have growth. We lose cells as they die off, and then they grow and make new ones. And we have this cell growth that are copies. The other one we will talk about is meiosis, which is the development of sex cells, which means we are producing what are called gametes, or these sex cells for the purpose of reproduction, which means it's not going to be an exact copy. It's going to take the DNA and kind of shuffle it around a little bit and only contain half of your DNA, half of your chromosomes to give to your offspring, because offsprings are this mix of one parent and one parent, right? You have the male sperm and the female egg, and you have 50% of the genetic code, and then the other 50% coming together, and that process is meiosis. So going back to mitosis, where it's an exact clone of itself, here's a video that we're going to watch that explains that process and the different steps that happen for a cell to actually divide and make a copy of itself.
We looked at the general process of mitosis in this video. In this video, we are going to add in some extra detail, including the names of the key stages. You may want to watch this video first to refresh your memory of how mitosis works. You should already know that mitosis is the process of cell division that produces identical copies of cells and is involved in growth, cell repair, and asexual reproduction. When cells divide by mitosis, the number of cells increases, and hence the organism grows. Different organisms have different numbers of chromosomes. And to keep it simple, we are just going to look at what happens to one pair of chromosomes during cell division. Before we start, just a quick reminder that a chromosome is made up of 2 chromatids, and one from the mother and one from the father. So mitosis, with our special sciencey names, add in, to this day, I just remember IPMAN, to remember which order the stages go in. Then just tag cytokinesis into the end. Interphase, the chromosomes duplicate and become 2 identical chromatids, joined at the centromere. So in humans, it has gone from the original 46 to 92. In prophase, in the nucleus, the chromosomes condense, and in the cytoplasm, spindle fibers form. Metaphase, the nuclear membrane breaks apart. The spindle fibers attach to the chromosomes, and the chromosomes line up at the equator of the cell. Anaphase, the spindle fibers shorten and the centromere divides, so that each chromosome becomes two separate chromatids. Telophase, the nuclear membrane forms around each set of chromosomes. Chromosomes spread back out in their new nucleus, and the spindle fibers break down. In humans, each nucleus has the normal 46 chromosomes again. Cytokinesis. The cell membrane pinches into two separate sets of chromatids into two identical daughter cells with the same number of chromosomes as the parent. So 46 or 23 pairs in humans. So there we have how cells divide by mitosis to form two new identical cells with the special IPMAT. Sciencey words included.
All right, so that is that process of mitosis, of how that one cell copies all of its DNA, splits it in two, and then separates into two completely identical cells. And we see that from like the growth of a child, from that single cell embryo where it starts dividing and dividing and dividing, making this multicellular body that we have, this multicellular organism. And it is exponential growth. So it grows really quickly because you think like one cell divides into two, and then two into four, those four into eight, eight into 16, 16 to 32. And within like 6-7 divisions, we're already at 100. And then it'll be 200. And then very soon it'll be 1,000. So since it is exponential growth, this can happen so quickly in multicellular organisms like ourselves. If you were to take the anatomy class for like the nursing program, when they do the cell division, one of the things you will have to know are these 6 phases, the names of them, and kind of the general idea of what is happening during these 6 phases. One of the vocabulary words that came up was chromatid. So we talked about chromosomes, which are kind of like these X shapes, which is the DNA that's just like folded back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, creating what looks like this kind of X shape. A chromatid is actually just half of it, because for every chromosome, half is coming from the father and that other half is coming from the mother, and they link together and they're paired. So all of your chromosomes are paired from that genetic code. So chromatids was one of our vocabulary words. So that's mitosis. Meiosis is development, but making those specific sex cells, which means it's not going to do an exact copy of the DNA. It's going to take the DNA and it's going to shuffle it around a little bit for the purposes of heredity, so that when it gives offspring, it's giving different chunks of DNA to different offspring. Because we talked about in our last class over genetics, you get 50% from your mom, but out of all of your genetic code of your mom, you don't know what 50% you're getting. Her DNA, all of her chromosomes kind of do this shuffle, and you get half of it from your mom, but you don't know which part, which 50% you're getting. And then your dad does the same thing. His do this kind of shuffle of the DNA, and then you get 50% of it, but you don't know specifically what 50% you're getting. And so this is the process of meiosis, or creating those sex cells in both males and females. Let's watch this video.
Sperm meets egg, which then undergoes multiple cell divisions to make a living organism with trillions of cells all doing their own specialized function. Impressive, but where do the egg and sperm come from? The answer is, as you may have guessed from the title, meiosis. First, it's good to know that there are 2 types of cell division processes. The simpler one is mitosis, which produces 2 identical cells with exactly the same genetic information. You can think of them as clones of each other. And to find out more, why not look at our videos about mitosis? The other process is meiosis. It's a much more complicated process, creating not 2 but 4 cells with only half the number of chromosomes. and crucially, all genetically different from each other. Both mitosis and meiosis include the same phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Except in meiosis, they happen twice, so they usually referred to as 1 and 2. The easiest way to remember these phases names is to remember IPMAT. So let's look at meiosis in more detail. As always, cellular division starts with a process called DNA replication. This involves making two identical copies of the original DNA molecule. The cell ends up temporarily with double the normal number of chromosomes. You can learn more about DNA replication in this video. In prophase 1, the duplicated chromosomes join up with the pair from the other parent, so the mother's pair bind with the father's pair, forming a group of two chromosomes called homologous chromosomes. What happens next is
And
vital
this
for
is also
successful.
like when you get DNA from your dad, right? You get half of his chromosomes, but it's also not just half from his dad, right? It is a mixing because his DNA is a mixing of your grandparents, right? So you're getting half from his dad, your grandfather, and half from his mom, your grandmother. And even those match up and do a shuffle so that you're constantly passing down bits of that heredity and that DNA. You're getting some that go all the way back to your grandmother, and you're having some that go all the way back to your grandfather. You just don't know which 25% you're getting from each one of them to make up your 50% from your dad.
Meiosis. As each chromosome is lined up next to its partner's pair, one chromatid from each side gets entangled with a corresponding chromatid.
And this is what's different about mitosis. We're going to see the DNA do this like swapping, the shuffling, right? That it's going to shuffle some of those genes around to then give to those different offspring, to give us all those different combinations that we have for heredity.
From the other side. This is called crossing over. During this brief period, the two chromatids swap certain sections of DNA. This is called recombination. The sections that they trade correspond to the same location, so that each chromatid retains the correct number of genes. Recombination is really important because it creates variety. The new cells aren't identical to the other parents, and they also are different to one another as well. They are new genetic combinations. In fact, that's the whole point of sexual reproduction. It increases genetic variability. Each chromatid is now different, and as each one will end up in a separate gamete, it means each sex cell is genetically different from all others. This explains why brothers and sisters are different despite having the same parents. Only identical twins have the same genetic makeup, as they both originate from the exact same egg and sperm. Now back to meiosis. Next comes metaphase 1. As the chromosomes align themselves up in the middle of the cell, and in anaphase 1, the spindle fibers pull the chromosomes apart to opposite ends. Then during telophase 1 and cytokinesis, the cell pinches apart in the middle, and the nuclear membrane reforms around the two new daughter cells. That's the end of meiosis 1. Now for part 2. We start with our recombined daughter cells, each still with 46 chromosomes, but sperm and egg cells only have 23 chromosomes, so we need to cut these cells in half. Here goes a second round of division. The process is exactly the same as before, except that there is no DNA replication. We start straight with prophase 2, with chromatin clumping again to form chromosomes. Then a line in the middle of the cell during metaphase 2, and chromatids are pulled apart during anaphase 2 by the spindle fibers. Telophase and cytokinesis pinch the cells together, with 4 new granddaughter cells being formed. The end of
And so we
meiosis.
end up with these 4 genetically different cells, which are then the sperm for the male or the ovary, the ovule for the woman, and that then is what's passing on the genetic heredity to the children. So we have meiosis. One of the vocabulary words that they mentioned were gametes. That's another way that we describe these here, those sex cells. These are the gametes for humans. We have sperm for male and ovule for woman, gametes. And so those were our two processes. We had mitosis, which are exact clones. Meiosis is that changing, that shuffling of the DNA for the purposes of offspring and heredity. And like I said, if you take an anatomy course at university to get the bachelor's or to do a nursing program, you will be expected to know the order of these six stages, or five. There actually is a sixth stage that they didn't mention, and then putting them in order and kind of having a general idea of what is happening in those stages. So one of the activities that we have today, if we go over to the homework, I have some readings that we have over mitosis and meiosis. And for the meiosis reading, it'll actually have you label the different those six stages and then actually give us kind of a basic definition of what's going on in these six stages of cell division. All right, so that's the cellular level of how cells divide and we grow and we have that development. We're now going to focus on the stages of pregnancy, of how do we go from that one single cell and divide, and how does that division happen to then developing into the bodies that we have today of all these different cells doing different things. So let's take a look. We have our stages of pregnancy. I'm sure as we know that a pregnancy is 9 months, 40 weeks altogether is the pregnancy, and we divide pregnancy into 3 trimesters, about 3 months for each of those trimesters. So we're going to look at each trimester and what is actually going on, how we go from that single cell all the way to a fully multicellular organism. All right, let's take a look. So we have our first one. So from conception to 4 weeks, this is kind of what we look like. It's very, very, very small, less than half an inch, right? We're talking about something really small, but even that small, the heart and blood vessels are starting to develop, and we're starting to see the development of all the major organs, the lungs, the stomach, the liver, and all of that is developing. And this is where we look at things like fetal alcohol syndrome, right? That even during the first 4 weeks of pregnancy, there are so many vital developments that are happening with those organs and with the circulatory system that if there's any like introduction to alcohol or drugs or anything that can actually affect the development of the baby. And that's something here in Alaska that the healthcare system is very concerned with the high levels of alcoholism and alcohol abuse, and then that high levels of fetal alcohol syndrome here in Alaska. Next, the 8 weeks, we see the fetus growing to about half an inch. We start seeing the development of eyelids, ears, nose, arms, legs, fingers and toes are starting to develop, but still they're not quite distinguishable yet. You can't quite see them. And at 12 weeks, so after that first, we're 3 months into the pregnancy, we see a pretty fully formed fetus. We see a lot of movement. It's starting to move. It has a distinguishable heartbeat that with medical equipment we can listen to. And the baby starts to develop sex organs. So you can actually identify the gender, the sex of the baby at this development. Moving on to the next trimester. So the next 3 months, what we see. So at 16 weeks, we're at 4.5 inches, 3.5 ounces. The eyes can start to blink. We have a very developed circulatory system. The heart is working, blood vessels are going, and blood is pumping through that body. And we see that developing here. Fingers and toes, even fingerprints are even developed at this stage too. So we have a pretty fully developed little body there growing, and it starts to grow. At 20 weeks, we're at 6 inches, 10 ounces. It starts to suck its thumb, yawn, stretch, a lot more movement. This is where the mother experiences a lot. You really feel the baby kicking and moving by 20 weeks. And this is also the time for the first ultrasound. So as healthcare providers, this is a big time to remember. 20 weeks is around when mothers are getting that first ultrasound. Um, 24 weeks, we're at 1.5 pounds. And this is where the inner ear develops, where the baby starts responding to sound. So it can hear sounds, it can respond to sounds, even at 24 weeks. So we're about two thirds of the way through the pregnancy. At 28 weeks, we're at 2 pounds, 6 ounces. We kind of see that exponential growth, right? Just like with those cells, that it's kind of like doubling and it's doubling and it's doubling. And so here's where we're going to start seeing a lot of changes really quickly with weight. It's going to start going really quickly in the last 2 months of pregnancy. Um, at 28 weeks, premature delivery is possible. And so this is kind of the benchmark at 28 weeks. If there's a pregnancy that's before 28 weeks, it's nearly impossible to have a premature delivery. 28 weeks is kind of where doctors want the development to be to even consider a premature delivery and trying to save the baby. Is about 28 weeks. At 32 weeks, we're at 4 pounds. You really start to see the skin fully develop and like this fat layer under the skin. That's why babies are so like, they're so squishy, right? They're so fluffy with this fat layer that develops under their skin. And the baby really starts to gain weight, right? And it goes from 4 all the way to then 6 pounds is kind of the average weight of a baby when it's born, some more, some a little less. And they're about 18.5 inches long on average. We see a lot of brain development happening here at the end, and we see the lungs fully developed. They actually start using their lungs where they will actually take in some of the liquid and actually be using those lungs as practice, even though they're inside the placenta. They will be using their lungs and building those muscles to take their first breath after they're born. And then for kind of timeframes for birth itself, all of these are kind of um, what's the word they use? It's kind of like, it's not on time, but it's kind of like what I say. But if anything is between 37 to 42 weeks, it's kind of the time frame for pregnancy. It is considered a little early, between 37 to 39 weeks. At term is 39 to 40, and 40 to 41 to 42 is late. By this point, doctors are really starting to think about, we're going to have to induce labor or do a C-section of some kind, because we're really getting beyond the 42 weeks of pregnancy. And so these are the stages of pregnancy. All right, moving on to next one. So we had that development. This one I think is the most interesting, right? We see so much going on from birth to 5 years old. And there's so much important development that is going on. And we're having so much research. A lot of educational psychologists, doctors are really researching this stage of development and putting an emphasis on how important it is and how important this development is happening, and how important it is for parents to be active with their children, encouraging these developments, and how vital it is. And how if some children don't develop some of these skills, how difficult it is to develop later on in life, if not impossible. Um, so I'm going to talk briefly about infant and child development. We have, I mean, I'm probably going to spend 20, 30 minutes on it. Something to keep in mind, this is such a complicated topic. You could actually take university courses. They have four semester-long university courses, all developed towards toddler and infant development, and all these different aspects and milestones and things that we measure when looking at how much is a child and infant developing. This is one of our certificate programs at the University of Alaska, and it's also part of the early childhood development program, the associate's degree for early childhood development. These are all of the classes that you have to take for it. So like I said, we're talking about a very complex, complicated thing that we could spend years talking about all different aspects. I'm just going to give you a really quick, brief summary to show you how complicated it is, and all the things that we look for. When we're looking at early childhood development, it is not just physically how are they growing, not just their physical health, but all of these other aspects. Cognitively, are they learning? How are they learning? What is actually going on in their brain from a neurological level, and are they growing? Are we seeing that speech and language development of auditory, oral language, literacy eventually when we start getting into preschool and kindergarten? Social and emotional development. Are they making friends? How are they making friends? Are they playing with others? Are they making eye contact? Are they picking up on social cues? Like when someone leaves, you have to wave goodbye to them. That's the rule that we have socially. And then also these physical developments of all of these fine motor skills and the gross motor skills. Do they eventually learn to walk? Do they learn to run? Are they able to pick things and stack things, scoot, all these different motor skills that are important to develop? So we're going to take a closer look at these. These are some of the milestones for infants from 2 years. So from birth to 2 years, all the different development that we kind of look for to see healthy, to measure healthy development of a child, right? Can they physically lift their head? Are they able to smile and laugh, right? Are they interacting with the world around them? Are they able to track objects with their eyes, right? Can they follow something with their eyes? Are they focusing on things from different distances? Are they making those sounds? Are they producing sounds? Even though it's not necessarily intelligible language, are they using sounds? Are they making sounds? Are they going to start gesturing towards things? Imitating sounds, super important for that oral development. Um, and then at 8 months, we start seeing some words appear, right? That they're saying those popular words. They have a really small vocabulary. Less than 50 words is kind of the vocabulary of an 8 to 9 month-year-old, but should know some of those really basic words. Bottle. They're trying to communicate. They've figured out there's this code that adults have, and they use oral language to talk about the things that they want. And if I can say the word of the thing that I want, they're more likely to give it to me. They start figuring out this game, this code that we have with the thing called oral language. Waving goodbye, that's social, right? That they're learning these social cues. You wave when someone says hello, you wave when someone says goodbye, you shake hands, right? You're starting to learn these social cues of how we interact as human beings in our cultural context. Understanding simple directions. And then 2 months, we see like they're walking downstairs. Um, some of the speech is understandable. They want about half of it at 2 years old. You should be able to understand half of the things that are being said. So these are all milestones. But something to keep in mind is that they are just milestones, right? They're kind of benchmarks, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's some type of a problem. There doesn't mean there's any type of a developmental disability if a child hasn't reached that benchmark yet. Some children develop faster than others, and some develop a little bit slower than others. And we definitely see that with speech and language. Looking at speech, these are kind of the general milestones, those benchmarks that we look for in speech. So from the first 5 months, we definitely want to hear a lot of sounds, right? Laughter, crying, giggles, making these different sounds and really kind of responding to the world around them. 6 to 11 months, we start seeing those simple words. No, maybe they want bottles, maybe they want bunny, that they're whatever that toy is that they want, where they're trying to communicate to the world. They realize humans have this way of communicating what they want. If I can figure out this game, if I can figure out this code, I can communicate and tell them what I want, and they give it to me. You can see them developing this thought process cognitively. Um, we are now at 1 and 1.5 years. This is where they can answer simple questions and non-verbally, right? You can be like, which one's the red one? Grab the red one. Or you can give them non-verbal cues, and they can show you that they understand what you are saying even long before they can produce words. This is why baby sign language is so popular. We have discovered that by this age, by 1.5, the child, the infant, that toddler has the cognitive capability to start building language structures. It has the cognitive capability to communicate and to understand, but it doesn't have the physical development of articulation, of place and mode of articulation, of aspiration to produce verbal language. But they have the motor skills and the fine motor skills to do gestures like more or toilet, I need to go potty, right? You can teach these nonverbal gestures to children. Is there a question?
No, I was just going to say I've actually had firsthand experience with sign language and them communicating with my niece, and
Hmm.
it's amazing how much they can say with their hands without being able to say it with their words.
Can you give some more examples, Christina? Like what? What are some of the things that the child expresses?
Well, we started with they want more or
Hmm.
they want to
Hmm.
eat,
Yeah.
and then we just went from parents, aunts, uncles, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, and that's super important. And this is something that is kind of newer because before this, like if we go 50 years ago, there was kind of this mindset of like babies really aren't that smart because they don't have verbal language, right? They can't talk to us. Therefore, they're not smart. But this really changed in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s when researchers were really studying the brain of infants, going, no, they're so much more capable of doing things than we ever thought they could do, but we judge them simply because they can't use our form of communication, verbal language, right? Just because they don't know the code yet to express themselves doesn't mean those cognitive processes are not going on inside their brain. And we're going to look at some of those cognitive processes later today, which are pretty awesome. So going on with language development, here we're up to 2 years old. We really start to see that vocabulary by the end of 2 years. They should have about 50 words, right? In and this is interesting culturally. This varies from language to language and culture to culture. Um, Maurice, you might be interested in this because bilingual babies do this a little bit differently. In the United States, we're very object focused, right? We focus on shapes, colors, sizes, but you see other languages like Spanish for one of them. Spanish focuses a lot more on actions and verbs. It's a very verb based language. So a lot of the first words that babies learn are these verb based things. Let's go, sit down. It's a lot of verbs and actions that they're using because that's what's used more in the language around them. But in English, we're very object focused, right? Ball, bunny, cup, milk, bottle, circle, red, all of these things that you can see and touch, these tangible objects that we're teaching to children. Should know some basic foods of some names, can say things like milk, juice, and then really, this is the important one, especially when we start looking at cognitive, this idea of pronouns, right? They're starting to learn perspective. This is mine and that's yours, right? That ownership. We have different people with different lives, and they're starting to realize that it's not just them. They live in a world with other people, and those other people have things, have feelings, have opinions, and we're starting to develop that. And that's important that babies are understanding that it's not just them in the world, there's other perspectives and other people. And we see that cognitively where we can give some tests to see at what point does a child realize that this world exists. 2 to 3 years old, we start seeing more prepositions. We see that with a concept called object permanence, which we'll look at too here in a little bit, of like, just because we don't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. At this age, children are starting to realize, I know there's a bottle. Even though I can't see it, I know it's still there. I put it here, I walk away, I come back, it should be there because it's there. Even though I can't see it, it still exists. Children before this haven't developed that cognitive skill yet. This is why like the game Peekaboo is so interesting to children, because literally if they don't see it, it no longer exists in their world. But when they obtain object permanence, you start seeing and knowing where things are. So this starts becoming really important, where things are located in space, in, on, under, and remembering where they are. Really understanding those perspectives of there's different people, we use different words for those people. They are also living things with their own thoughts and feelings, and I'm being aware that I am part of a bigger picture. It's not just me as a baby. I am part of this bigger thing. Can start identifying plurals is a big one at this age too. The difference between shoe or shoes, socks or socks, right? That they're um, adding these. What's super interesting about a language perspective at this age, we start to see the development of grammar where they realize, oh, I can add an S to the end of a word to make it plural. And you start seeing making mistakes with irregular words like foot, foots, right? Tooth, tooths, and they start adding s's to all of their words to make them plural. And then later, within like a year or so, they start realizing, no, we have irregular plurals too: foot, feet, tooth, teeth. And they start learning these two, which is super interesting that they pick on to that grammatical rule really quickly, and the brain makes those connections. All right, 3 to 4, we start seeing all these other language things going on. Describing is kind of a big thing at this age, right? That they're able to tell you what something is, describe it, kind of tell you what it's for. And we start seeing a lot more of the grammar aspects, right? That they're adding ed to form past tense, they're adding ing, they're doing what's called morphology, or taking words and now changing those words to use them differently in our grammar and our structure. They're really understanding this complex structure of what we call language, and they're picking up on all of those small rules and nuances of the language even at the age of 4. Like I said, super fascinating. And by 4 or 5, start learning a lot more of these. Can do complex vocabulary, multisyllabic words that they're saying, and really this kind of goes back to that cognitive aspect too, of like, why do things happen, asking and answering the question why, right? You can say why and they come up with a reason. They're really thinking about the world around them and expressing that through the language. And then our 5-year-olds. So looking at vocabulary, I guess, so going back really quick, 4 or 5-year-olds, the big one I want to talk about is this here, directions, right? And this is what preschool and kindergarten teachers really look for. Can they follow multi-step procedures? Can we say, hey, take off your shoes, wash your hands, and sit at the dinner table? And can they do those 3 things in that order and follow those instructions by the age of 5? And if your kid can do that, your kindergarten teacher and first grade teacher will love you for so long. So yeah, looking at vocabulary, from birth to 5, the baby develops a vocabulary of 10,000 words. Think about that for a minute, right? A general 5-year-old develops a vocabulary of 10,000 words. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they can produce those 10,000 words. We have this thing called an active vocabulary and a passive vocabulary. A passive vocabulary is when we come across something we like, oh yeah, that's right. I know that word. I've heard that word before. I know what it is. But you actually look at your active vocabulary, the vocabulary you use on a daily basis. There are so many words we don't use all the time. Like, for example, I came across the word vexed this morning when I was reading VEXED, vexed. And I was like, oh, I know exactly what that means. It means to get angry at someone, to be frustrated, upset. But I would never use it when I was talking or even writing. That isn't necessarily a word I would use in my active vocabulary, but it's definitely there in my brain. When I came across it, I knew exactly what it was, and I'd been like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. I don't remember where, but it's in there. children have that type of a passive vocabulary of 10,000 words. And this is the important part. This is before they get to school pretty much. I mean, think about that. Before they get to school, they should be developing around 10,000 words in their vocabulary. And this is why home life is so important. And we're seeing healthcare workers, we're seeing educators, we're seeing any type of a public service that works with young parents and mothers and anyone who's parenting at home, the importance of development of these infants and toddlers and taking them to daycares, reading to them, exposing them to language because they have the cognitive capabilities to develop and to pick up all of those words and terms. And are they doing it before they even get to school? Because the facts are, once they get to school, they'll spend the next 5 years of elementary school just doubling their vocabulary. Half of the vocabulary they learned before they even got to school. And this is where, when we start looking at like bilingual studies, which is super fascinating, what happens when that 10,000 vocabulary is another language that's being spoken at home? What if it's Spanish or Russian or Portuguese? And then they now go to school where now everything is in English, and it's like, oof, it's still having to almost start over. But how quickly the brain can make those connections in a bilingual brain. And there's all this research suggesting that infants and children that are exposed to more than one language as a child, as an infant, develop language quicker and faster. Their vocabularies are bigger, their understandings of grammar is bigger, the types of language that they produce is more complex, and they have overall higher test scores when they get into schools because of that development that's happening before they even get to school. Like I said, as adults, we use that 20,000 words that we're kind of picking up, but we have another 20,000 in our reserves of this passive vocabulary that we hold on to. So an average adult has a vocabulary between 20 to 40,000. And again, a quarter of that, 25% of what you know, you picked up before you even made it to kindergarten. Think about that. All right, now the fun stuff, cognitive. What's actually going on in the brain cognitively? Um, there was a psychologist called Jean Piaget that was at the beginning of the 20th century that everyone studied, and everyone was like, "Wow, this is super interesting research that he's doing." And he came up with these different stages of saying, "Hey, as children develop, as we go through school, there are these different stages that we go through of cognitive thinking, of cognitive processes, of what we're actually capable of doing with our brain as critical thinkers." And he was one of the first people that came up along with Darwin oh, not Darwin, Sigmund Freud, was this idea of that there's these stages of development. Unfortunately, nowadays, we're looking at this and going, actually, some of these things, children that are younger can actually do them. We agree with Piaget that there are these benchmarks of development, but now we kind of disagree with Piaget because back then, the way that they were testing most children was through oral language, right? And they had that mindset of, well, since they can't speak to me, they must not be smart, right? We can't really judge how smart they are until they're actually able to communicate with us between the ages of 2 and 7. And that is something researchers today are stop that. There you go. Something today that researchers are really looking at these younger toddlers before the age of 2. How can we create experiments to test their cognitive capabilities? How much do they understand of the world around them? How much do they understand numbers and quantity and purpose and permanence and all of these things that we use cognitively? Do they understand it? And we're starting to realize they do. They understand so much more than we thought they do. Just because they don't have oral language doesn't mean these cognitive processes, this critical thinking isn't happening. So let's look at it. Here's what we believe today kind of goes on. These are some of the benchmarks that we look for cognitive processes, right? We see definitely the idea of focus, that eye contact, right? That following around, that if they're able to focus and follow it, what's going on in the brain there. Colors, we're able to see colors and identify color, not necessarily identify, but we can distinguish them, right? So you can start seeing colors, start to kind of make connections. Like here's the red ones, here's the yellow ones, there's the green ones, and starting to really see color. Taste, we can, 3-month-year-old can identify the taste of sweet, salty, bitter, and sour, and they can remember it, right? They can see something and they say, oh, I've tasted that before. That tastes sour. I know I don't like it. No, I don't want it. And think about that. Think about what that actually goes through mentally, right? You have to see the object, you have to remember the object, and you have to connect that to that taste of sour. And all that is going on a baby that's 3 months old, right? That's a lot of cognitive process of memory, the visual aspect, identification of it, and knowing, this thing, I know I don't like it. Or the opposite, ooh, this thing is really sweet. I've had that before. I like that. I want more of it. And the idea of facial expressions, right? Facial expressions responding to their environment is also something happens in the environment and their brain goes, I know what that is. That's something funny, or that's something good, or, oh, that's a new sound. That's bad, danger. I shouldn't do. And you start seeing those facial expressions even at 3 months, where cognitively they are aware and responding to their environment. Um, 3 to 6 months year olds. Again, facial expressions, but they're able to imitate them. They see them on other people, and they can react to familiar sounds, right? They hear it and they go, I know what that is. That's my toy. Or, oh, I know what that is. And this is kind of a game that you can do where you have toys. And that's why a lot of toys that children have make sounds, because it's really promoting this idea of exploring the world through the sounds that we hear and identifying the things around us simply based on its sound. There's a sound. I remember what that is. I've experienced it before and it's something good. Or, oh, I remember that sound. That's a bad sound. I don't like that. Let me get away from it. Um, we're now at 9 months old. This is where scientists are kind of using this here through eye contact, right? That they gaze longer at impossible things. And this is where research is taking these infants that are less than a year old, and they're putting them in a room and they're showing them images, they're showing them pictures, and then they show them something that's impossible, right? And they literally see the baby's face go, whoa, like that something is not right. And they're doing a lot of this with a lot of different things. One of the experiments that I saw that I really enjoyed was with numbers, right? Number sense. How much can a baby actually count and be aware of counting, right? Knowing that here's 2 objects, here's 3 objects, and here's 4 objects, and those are different. 4 objects is clearly more objects than 2 objects. Can a 9-month baby do that? And they found out they can. And the way they did it is they had kind of like a puppet show where they had this screen, right? And they had different animals, right? And so they would have like, they would put 3 of them and they would then close it and then they would open it and then they would 3 of them. But then they would go, there'd be 3 of them, they would close it and then 2 of them would go away and open it and the baby would go, what? Like, what just happened? Like there was 3 of them before and now there's just one. So they would do like magic tricks basically to babies that were completely visual, and just the idea of changing numbers, or do the opposite, right? They'd put in 1, close the curtain, open the curtain, and then now there's magically 3 of them. And the baby goes, what? Like there was just 1 and now there's 3 of them. And with those illusions, they know because of the baby's gaze and the baby's nonverbal response that it is responding to this change of number that was surprising and impossible to actually happen. And the baby's even questioning, whoa, 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 that is not how the world works. That is not how the reality works. And that baby is questioning that literally at just 9 months old. That's amazing, right? Am I right?
You're right.
Right?
Yes, you're right.
Isn't that amazing? And this is where something comes in where we have object permanence, right? at 1 year old, this is something psychologists look for. Does a baby understand object permanence? Just because we don't see something doesn't mean it's still not there. Right? We live in a world where, oh, I put this here, I walk away from it. I know it's still there because I put it there. I go back and there it is. Babies before the age of 1 often struggle with object permanence. And here's a video of an experiment working with a toddler to see if they understand object permanence. So you will see the caregiver, right? The person running the experiment is going to start, we'll have an object and then we'll hide it under a blanket and see if they know where it is. And they even watch her put it under the blanket, but because they can't see it anymore, it's like, oh, now it's gone. It's not even in my world anymore. I'm not even going to look for it because it's not there, because they haven't developed, oh, there it is, and then they'll reach for it, right? Like, oh, I see it. But then the moment they don't see it, it's like, oh, now it's gone. And so this is the idea of object permanence. Do they understand just because you can't see something that it's still there?
Oh, there it is. Did you get it? Okay, well, let's try it. Where's that bag?
And
Get it?
once the baby starts going, all I need to do is lift this blanket and there it is, you know they've understand the concept of object permanence, that they know, even though I don't see something, I know it still exists in the world around me. There's just something stopping me from seeing it. Or I need to just change my perspective. I need to look this way, or I need to turn around, and then I'll be able to interact with the thing that's there.
Oh, there it is.
So that's object permanence. Another one, so as we develop older, we have ages 1 to 2, we really start seeing that idea of perspective, like I was saying, that they're becoming aware of the world around them, that there's other people, there's other living things, and they're just like me, that they have desires, they have wants, they have things, and that can be different from what I want. And here's an experiment that they've done to see if a child, by the age of 2, they really want to understand this idea of perspective, that we know the people around us have other perspectives, and that perspective can differ from my perspective of what I want.
The question of how early children start to understand that other people think differently than they do is at the heart of a series of experiments conducted by Alison Gopnik of the University of California at Berkeley and her colleagues. In one study, 14 and 18-month-old children come into the lab and are presented 2 bowls, one with broccoli in it and one with crackers. Dr. Gopnik takes a taste of each of the foods.
Oh, yuck!
I tasted the crackers.
I don't like crackers. Ooh!
Broccoli. I like broccoli.
She clearly prefers the broccoli. To see if the child understands what she prefers, Dr. Gopnik puts out her hand and asks,
Could you give me some? You give me what I like.
And what we discovered was that 18-month-olds would give me the broccoli if I acted as if I liked the broccoli.
even though they probably prefer the crackers themselves.
So even these very, very little children already seem to have realized, okay, this is a strange person, she likes broccoli, but if that's what she likes, then that's what I'm going to give her.
And that's kind of one
And
of
that's
those benchmarks
really amazing.
here, like I said, around 2, that if you take a child that's less than a year old, they'll often give you just what they want. They'll just randomly give you, oh, this is good, I'll give it to you, no matter what nonverbal cues you gave me on what your preference is. But by the age of 2, we're really picking up on all those nonverbal cues, the gestures, the sounds, the language, and that says, ooh, this person likes this, doesn't like this. And if I need to give them one, of course I'm going to give them what they like. How cool is that? All right, 3 to 4. This is where we really start looking at the idea of space, right? Size, shape, and also quantity. Can we count things? Even before we have the language of counting, right? Before we know the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, babies understand and they have this level of what's called number sense, where they understand quantity. They understand this has more than this, and they can point it out to you. And here's an experiment, what they did, where they took candy and they had one line of candy that took up a small amount of space, right? It's a small space. And then they took some and they spread it out and they said, all right, you have to choose. Which one do you want? Do you want this one or do you want this one? And what they found is that under 3, they would often choose the top one because it seemed like it was bigger and there was more, right? There is more candy here, has to be more because it's so much bigger. But the 3 and 4-year-olds would actually look at them and say, no, no, no. This clearly has more M&Ms than this one, and I can count them. Even though I don't know the language, I don't know the numbers, and I can't tell you the word that you use, but looking at it, I know there's clearly more here than up there. So that's an experiment that you can do with 3 and 4-year-olds to see which one do they choose more often. And the more cognitive development the child has, they will always choose this one, knowing that there's more candies, more M&Ms, more crackers in that pile than in the bigger pile. And then 4 to 5-year-olds, this is where we start really getting into a lot more perspective, and we get to do a lot more really interesting things. And there's an experiment here called the what is it called? It is called the false belief task. That's what it is, the false belief task. That, do we start understanding lies? Can we understand that I know something that you don't know? Can you believe something that is actually not true? And I know something that is different than yours. And this is a really interesting perspective. And we have a video here to show you this.
The first thing I'm going to show you is a change between age 3 and 5, as kids learn to understand that somebody else can have beliefs that are different from their own. So I'm going to show you a 5-year-old who's getting a standard kind of puzzle that we call the false belief task.
This is the first pirate. His name is Ivan. And you know what pirates really like?
What?
Pirates really like cheese sandwiches.
Cheese? I love cheese.
Yeah. So Ivan has his cheese sandwich and he says, yum, 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 yum. I really love cheese sandwiches. And Ivan puts his sandwich over here on top of the pirate chest. And Ivan says, you know what? I need a drink with my lunch. And so Ivan goes to get a drink. And while Ivan is away, the wind comes, and it blows the sandwich down onto the grass. And now, here comes the other pirate. This pirate is called Joshua. See? And Joshua also really loves cheese sandwich. So Joshua has a cheese sandwich, and he says, yum, 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 yum. I love cheese sandwiches. And he puts his cheese sandwich over here on top of the pirate chest.
So that one is his.
That one's Joshua's. That's right.
And then his went on the ground.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now.
So he won't know which one is his.
Oh, so now Joshua goes off to get a drink. So Ivan comes back and he says, I want my cheese sandwich. So which one do you think Ivan's going to take?
I think he was going to take that one.
Yeah, you think
And so that's that idea of
yeah.
people can have false beliefs about what is actually true, right? So him as the observer, he knows, I know this is his sandwich, but I also know he doesn't know that is actually his sandwich. So he's going to have a false belief. He's going to believe the other one is actually his sandwich. And that is a lot of cognitive processes going on in the brain.
You were right. He took that one.
So that's a 5-year-old who clearly understands that other people can have false beliefs and what the consequences are for their actions. Now I'm going to show you a 3-year-old who got the same puzzle.
And Ivan says, I want my cheese sandwich. Which sandwich is he going to take? Do you think he's going to take that one? Let's see what happens. Let's see what he does. Here comes Ivan. He says, I want my cheese sandwich. And he takes this one. Uh-oh. Why'd he take that one?
His was on the graph.
Oh.
So the 3-year-old does two things differently. First, he predicts Ivan will take the sandwich that's really his. And second, when he sees Ivan taking the sandwich where he left his, where we would say he's taking that one because he thinks it's his, the 3-year-old comes up with another explanation. He's not taking his own sandwich because he doesn't want it because now it's dirty on the ground. So that's why he's taking the other sandwich. Now,
And so that's a difference of that cognitive process between a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, right? And that happens, this idea of perspective of I can observe the world and other people can observe the world and we can see different things. We can also believe different things about the world. I can have a belief of, oh, I know which one is actually his, but he's not going to know it. And so that advanced cognitive process is happening even before kids are getting to preschool, right? This 5 years of age. All right, so milestones. So in summary, these were all the different milestones that we looked at, cognitively, social, emotional. We didn't really touch on social, emotional, but that's like interacting, making friends, sharing, waving goodbye, picking up on all of those cultural social cues that we had. We looked at speech. We didn't really talk about fine motor skills, maybe a little bit in that one chart, but all of these things are happening in those first 5 years of development. And this then gives us a key to look for red flags of these warning signs of, is there some type of a developmental disability? Is the child not developing the way it should be, and what could be causing that? Is there fetal alcohol syndrome, stopping that development of language, of cognitive process, of motor skills? Do we see autism spectrum disorder? That last test that we just saw about the advanced perspective of I believe something that you don't believe. I know the truth, but I know they don't know the truth. That is something a person with autism on the autism spectrum disorder really struggles with. Not just children, but even teens and adults. If you know a teenager or an adult with autism and you give them that scenario, they often struggle with it because it's hard for them to say, no, but I know this is the truth. I know this is his sandwich, therefore he's going to pick up his sandwich because I know it's his sandwich. And it's hard for them to see other people's perspective on the situation. Does that make sense? Are we making sense?
Yeah.
Cerebral palsy. That one is definitely a lot more of the motor skills, right? That we're really looking at what motor skills are developing and is there some type of a developmental disability. With Crohn's syndrome, that's a genetic disorder, but the same thing. I have a chart here where it shows these skills develop a lot slower with someone with Down syndrome, right? That it takes 3 times, 4 times longer to develop a lot of these motor skills and then language skills and things like that as well. And so we can start seeing those early warning signs and educating parents about those early warning signs of maybe there's some type of a cognitive disability, and do we need specialists? Do we need applied behavior analysis? Do we need some of these explicit training tools to help children develop better? Autism spectrum disorder, these are some of the early warning signs too. So again, that idea of like the social emotional aspect of not smiling at people, right? The eye contact is a really big one too that should be on here. Poor eye contact is the same thing. Not looking when they're being called by name. We see some production loss as well, where they're not necessarily producing as much language as they should be. Other signs, we see a lot of isolation. So individuals with the autism spectrum disorder often prefer to play alone. They do what's called stimming, where they'll have an object like their favorite and they'll play with it over and over again, almost like OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder, where they do the same thing over again. Physical touch. Again, everyone's a little bit different, but that's kind of a trend with someone that is with ASD, that if it's often a texture issue, an autistic brain often is picking up more stimulus than a neurotypical brain. So all of the stimulus are magnified. So sounds are louder, lights are brighter, textures are rougher, scratchier, and there's just kind of I don't like it, right? I don't like it. And it irritates me. And if I get irritated, I have a flare up and a meltdown. And we see that with young children with ASD. So these developmental milestones. So that's why we have them. But again, the big thing to remember too is every child is different. Some develop faster, some develop slower, and these are kind of just guidelines to see, are we meeting those benchmarks, and what do we need to do to get them to meet those benchmarks as they develop. So that was infancy and toddlers. Now we're going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about one of my favorite topics, which is about development through our entire life. That we do keep developing, right? We are constantly developing all those same skills that we just talked about with toddlers. Cognitively, social, emotionally, all of these things physically we're developing, right? We get taller, we get bigger, we get stronger, we go through puberty, right? There's all these different stages. We then go through, we get older, we go through menopause as women do. You know, we go through aging, we develop dementia, we develop Alzheimer's, right? There's all these developments that can go on throughout the entire span of our life. So looking at adult development, we can look at these three categories, right? We have physical development, our physical body, the health of our body. And this is what healthcare often tends to focus at, right? What is our blood pressure levels? What's our cholesterol levels? How are we developing physically, and are we meeting all of those benchmarks? But now healthcare, especially behavioral health, is still really starting to look at this one, social, emotional, and also looking at cognitive. How are we developing our intellect, our intellectual capabilities, and how are we developing socially and emotionally? Where is our emotional intelligence? Can we identify the emotions of others? Can we understand even our own emotions and what's causing those emotions, and the cause and effect, and how those emotions affect our actions? So, looking at physical development, we know, and as healthcare workers, you will see these charts in the offices that when you're working with patients, we will look at their height, you'll measure their height, then you'll measure their weight, and that'll give us this chart of these benchmarks of this is the target weight for an individual at that height, how much they should weigh. And then we also have these charts that show the terms overweight and show the words obese and very obese. These are CNA terms that you do need to know. There is a difference between overweight and obese. They are different terms. Overweight is slightly, obese is more, very obese is crucial. And as healthcare workers, we know that there is a direct correlation between weight and health issues. The more a person is obese and very obese, we will see higher levels of cardiovascular disease. We will see higher levels of diabetes. We will see these health issues correlate to their weight as well. All right, so stages of cognitive development. So we looked at the infants, right? All those cognitive capabilities, but then we look at adults, like what should teenagers and adults and what we do. And we started off just like with Piaget, right? In the 19th century, scientists and psychologists were really starting to ask these questions even 100 years ago. And they've developed the IQ test. And a lot of people talk about IQ. And they had this bell curve of someone with a really high IQ was definitely someone who was really special, was super smart, was really gifted and talented. And then we also had individuals on the other spectrum. But then most of the people, the average person is around 100 on the IQ score. The thing with this, though, the IQ test has changed over time, but the number system has not. So as society develops, it still keeps 100 its average, right? So the average person today and the average person's intellect should be a 100. But it's hard to measure because if we look at what was someone's actual cognitive capabilities 100 years ago, and has that changed, right? Has it increased? Has it decreased?
Dramatically.
Has education improved? Like what's actually going on with their cognitive capabilities? And so a lot of people don't use IQ tests anymore. It's just kind of like, it's not reliable. It's not really testing. They were testing some really interesting things like sequencing, patterns, color, shapes, sizes, mathematics, all of these cognitive things that were going on. But nowadays we look at some other things. We have vocabulary that we had talked about too, and a person's language and language development of literacy. Um, there is a researcher called Howard Gardner, in the 80s, and he developed a theory called multiple intelligences. That we can't just give an IQ number to somebody, right? Because what are we measuring, right? The IQ test was really looking at sequencing, it was looking at number sense, it was looking at patterns, but there's so much more to intelligence than just that. And he created that there are 8 different fields of intelligence, and people can be intelligent in various different fields, right? So if we look at music, right? People can have really strong musical skills. There are those people that can sit down and it's almost as if they can just pick up an instrument and learn to play it. There's those people that can play 4 or 5 instruments, right? They're musical geniuses. We have people like Mozart that was able to write complete symphonies, right? As a teenager, these musical geniuses. And that is one of our levels of intelligence, how musical and the musicality that someone has. We have logic sense and mathematics. This is what the IQ test was really kind of looking at. But again, intelligence is so much more. We have spatial awareness. How aware are you, or how aware are you of the space around you? Do you know where you are? Can you point to north? When you go on a hike, do you know, we're about half a mile that direction and I'm aware of the space that I'm around? And then also from like an artistic perspective, can I take the 3-dimensional world and reproduce it on a 2-dimensional paper like an artist? So we see a lot of art skills, and there's some people that are talented artists, right? That are just incredible at drawing and seeing and being able to reproduce what they see. They would be intelligent in that area. Kinesthetic is our body movement. This would be like our athletes, right? Olympic athletes are geniuses when it comes to the field of kinesthetics, right? They are at prime intellectual capabilities when it comes to balance, coordination, endurance, cardio, stretching, all of those skills. They are at that genius level when they're competing at the Olympics. We have linguistics, which are words, languages, understanding patterns, spelling, you having a larger vocabulary is one of our intelligences too. We have interpersonal, which is communicating with people, and we also have intrapersonal, which is like being aware of yourself, knowing your own emotions, knowing who you are as a person. We learned that there are different types of learners, right? We have visual learners, we have auditory learners, we have kinesthetic learners, and we choose to learn differently, and we learn more effectively differently. And for some reason, some adults develop to be visual learners, some develop to be auditory learners, and that there are these different types of learners. Another researcher, again, at the end of the 20th century, called Bloom, he created Bloom's taxonomy of higher cognitive development. And he says that we all as humans go through this process of, these are cognitive skills that we need to have, and they build on top of each other. First, we have to be able to remember information. Then we can understand information and say, oh, I get it, and now I understand it. We can apply information. Now that I know something, I can use it in different fields, different areas. To give you an example, tying shoes, right? If you learn how to tie your shoes, you can now apply that skill to other areas. Now I can tie my bathing suit. Now I can tie the straps on my backpack. Now I can tie a ribbon on a Christmas present. It's the same skill. I'm now applying it to different areas. Analyzing, right? Really thinking, critiquing. This is where we get into the evaluating, the idea of judging information, the value of it, which one's better, why is it better? And then finally, that level of creating something new. And that we go through these stages of higher cognitive development. And as parents, educators, healthcare workers, we have to remember, are we asking the right type of questions to promote that cognitive development? Are we promoting applying information, analyzing information, evaluating information, and starting those skills of critical thinking? That critical thinking is a skill, just like playing basketball. Critical thinking is a skill just like dancing, and you need to do it and practice it to be good at it. And then stages of emotional development. This is the last person I wanted to talk about. His name is Eric Erikson, and he was here again at the end of the 20th century, where he developed the 8 stages of psychosocial development, Eric's stages of development. And he had this profound idea that as adults, as humans, as we develop, there are these different stages throughout our life where there's this kind of this balance beam, this continuum, where we are fighting for one side or the other side, and we get kind of shuffled back and forth. If we don't get this, we end up more like this on this balance beam. And so here are the different stages that he had talked about, and looking at some of them. So like infants, those brand new born babies, they're kind of struggling between this idea of trust and mistrust. And it's connected often to care, like feeding, being cared, being taken care of, right? And that baby will either develop trust because its caregivers took care of it, fed it, it learned it can rely on other people, it could build those levels of intimacy, and it learned it and developed that as a baby. Or if those things don't happen, it starts to develop mistrust. Like it doesn't trust society. No, I can't trust other people because no one's going to take care of you. No one's going to be there for you. And I know it because it's never happened to me, because I never had that as a baby. We see a lot of this with orphans. We see a lot of this what's called detachment disorder, where individuals were not nurtured as babies, and they overall have this feeling of, I don't trust people, I don't trust the things around me because I wasn't taken care of as a child. Jumping to young adults, where a lot of us are, he says we're in this stage of intimacy versus isolation, that young adults are looking for love and romance, right? They're looking for this stage in their life, right? That they see all of their friends around them getting married, they see all of their friends around them getting into these relationships, and it's like that I need this romantic relationship, and if I don't have it, I feel isolated and alone. And it doesn't matter how many friends I have. I could have all the friends in the world, but if I don't have that intimacy, that romantic partner, I just feel like something is missing from my life. I go out in public, see people holding hands, and it disgusts me, right? Why don't I have that? I want that. And we see this balance beam between intimacy and isolation. So he has all of these different balance beams for these different stages of life, even all the way up to death. That at death, we're really doing this game of kind of reflecting over our life or regretting the decisions that we had made, right? Saying, man, I made these great things. Look at the legacy that I left. I was such a great person, or I made this mistake, and what did I actually do with my life? And all this regret, right? So there's this balance beam between, do I feel like I lived a good life? I had integrity, or do I feel despair for all of the bad decisions that I made? And it's this like balance beam of social development that we do. I know it is 12:04. I covered this information super quickly. This chart explains it. I would recommend going through this chart and reading through it. I actually have a question, an assignment for you guys this week to do it over this. That'll kind of help you dive into those a little bit more. But that was the 4 bits of human development that I wanted to talk about this class. So that is it. That is the information I have for you all. If we go to our Google Classroom, here's our 4 assignments that I have this week. I have a short reading over mitosis and meiosis with multiple choice questions. I even threw in some bonus readings if you wanted to do them, but you don't have to. But they're pretty simple, and they talk about cell division, DNA replication. Assignment 2 is about infant and toddler development. It's about those experiments that we saw. And there's a question in there asking you, if you have a child in your life or a niece or a nephew, to do some of those experiments to see kind of where they're at with their cognitive development. The psychological experiment, that's actually where the experiments is. This one here is going to ask you to just analyze the different milestones that we see with child development, and what are some of the things we look for with with language. What do we look for motor skills, for different aspects. And then the last one is what we just talked about, the Erik Erikson stages of social development. And this will be a reflection question on where are you in that spectrum? What stage are you at? Which ones have you gone through? Did you see those in your life that you went through those? Which ones are going to come next in your life? And what do you see your future going towards? And so those are the 4 assignments. I have the copy of the sheets of the presentations that you can review there. And then I do have an advanced reading for individuals who are wanting to go into a nursing program that actually shows like the anatomy textbook looking at that cell division and what's actually going on in those 6 stages of cell division and how the DNA replicates itself and all of those things. So that is the homework assignments for this week.